Okay, remember that third change in my voice. In this video, I'm going to discuss a lot of Cold War activities in Africa. Okay, we're going to be focusing more on the 60s, 70s, a little bit in the 80s, and a little bit in the 90s. We're going to talk about Algeria and its fight for independence. Just briefly, right? It's going to be a short video. We're going to talk about how the CIA propped up various leaders, and that's the word that the white or Jewish gentleman who made the video, used, right? The phrase he used, propped up. Okay, propped him up. We're going to talk about people supplying arms, right? Because these are, again, as you've seen in the last video, these are political, economic, and military interventions. CIA interventions. Giving them arms, selling them arms, giving them money, giving them support for the purpose of manipulating these nations for the foreign agenda of superpowers. These nations aren't self-governing nations. They're not autonomous, as they say, in the truest sense of the word. These nations are controlled, on record, by developed nations. And just like the Cold War didn't end in 91, right? We see all the examples here. Look at the arms race with Russia. Look at Ukraine taking on Russia. Textbook Cold War activity. Better than Cold War. They're directly fighting Russia instead of fighting another proxy nation or a satellite nation, what have you. So after this, Donald Trump, if he watches this video, and my social status in reality is higher than his, I'm the top martial artist. He's just another president. Way cooler than he is. Way smarter than he is. People respect me more if they truly understand who I am. If they truly understand who he is, they respect him a lot less. So my social status in reality is higher. In terms of, in the psychological construct, in terms of fame, that's a different story. Fame in that sort of sense. Okay, so we'll get to that. We'll help you understand why the Cold War is very much about financial control, sexual control. Big time sexual control is a huge part of it. It's also about social status, right? CIA, right? C-I alpha. Who you see is the alpha. And A-ICE, right? ICE without the E. The C can have an S sound. A-ICE. And of course, ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's been in the news recently, right? CIA activity and ICE activity are very much connected in this country. Intelligence agencies are very much involved in the ICE operations and who's doing what and why and what kind of weapons they're using. Okay, it's business as usual. When you look at these songs where they talk about yesteryear and they're singing about how fast time goes by, the things, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Maybe the style changed a little bit. Hey, people have cell phones now and iPhones and smartphones, but, there's a reason why the conservatives are called conservatives. They're very much like conservatives in the 40s and 50s, right? Things haven't changed much. And the 50s weren't that long ago. And a lot of these events we're going to be talking about took place in the 80s and the 90s. Okay? And the Cold War continues to this day. I don't think people understand that. Therefore, the sabotage of African nations continue to this day. I really proved my point 2 videos ago, especially the last video, which is the official part 1. And in this video, I'm going to overkill it to where only an idiot would argue that proxy leaders, puppet governments, prove the genetics of Africans magically inferior. Right? Only a dumbass, only a dumb, poorly bred, inbred, hidden in the snow, while empires are being formed type of a bitch would believe that. And I'm not saying that aiming at all white people, but if you are the type of person that would argue that white people are superior, then I'm going to say that you're the type of person that hides in the snow when Egypt is civilizing the world. A black Egypt, and the type of person that knows that, so he turns around and says, they were white. Even though Egyptians depicted both Libyans and Assyrians and Babylonians as white-skinned people, why they depicted themselves as black. Okay? My goodness. The type of people that, does a biased Eurocentric study, and there's a long history. That's part of the Cold War. Propaganda is a huge part of it. Even sports rivalry is a huge part of it. These people are revisionists. These people are the type of people who get caught faking artifacts. These are the type of people who have MAGA in the science departments, right, and eliminating studies like Justice Department studies about conservative extremism. They eliminate studies in regards to Egypt as well to paint a certain picture of a white Egypt. These people are idiots. You know, the Bible says Egypt was black, right from Ham. Ham, Mizraim, right from Ham. Okay, African people themselves know Egypt was black. There was a Berber district in Egypt, just like there was a foreign period where there's Greeks and Romans, but these guys were Cushites and people mixed race people, what have you. If you consider Obama black, you consider me black, then you consider the Egyptians, the first dynasty, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, what have you. You consider them black people, right? First intermediate period between the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, and the second intermediate period after the Middle Kingdom. Okay, so let's get into this. So the Cold War never ended, and we're going to see why that is in this video. The French-Algeria conflict culminated with the international community pressuring France until Charles de Gaulle became president, and he pushed for Algeria's independence with ulterior motives, obviously. And that independence was gained in 1962. So what happened? A bunch of Freemasons and people in various social clubs and political movements and corporations started pressuring France to change the way that white people and Africans and so on relate to each other. Why? Well, in America and in England, right, there was these changes that were taking place, right? In America, people were desegregating, right? You know, the Civil Rights Acts were in the 60s. So this is, you know, in the late 50s, the 60s, there's a lot of these things taking place. A lot of this discussion is popular with the global community. And they also want to make it so that people of other races seem to naturally revere them. So they put all these social clubs out there on record, okay? They put all these corporations out there to try to, you know, create a certain dynamic, right? Segregation wasn't about separate but equal. In reality, it was about trying to make the white man seem superior, and everyone knows it. Any historian will tell you, yeah, that's what it was about. That's what the lynchings were about. They were about trying to feign white genetic superiority. You look at the eugenics movement, the forced sterilizations, right? Look at social Darwinism, okay? Scientific racism. It's clear cut. Nothing can be clearer than that kind of thing. Okay. So keep in mind that the year before, at the beginning of the year, in January of 1961, Patrice Lumumba was assassinated and replaced. Why? Because he was basically someone who was a socialist who was starting to really collaborate with the Russians. He looked to the Russians for help to, you know, maintain power, to squash rebellions, what have you. His predecessor kissed Western ass, okay? And by the time, you know, and that led to the Congolese forces, right? Because Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, and the Belgian forces and the American forces working together to put down a certain rebellion. So eventually you get this guy kissing ass. His name is Joseph, I wrote this somewhere here, Mobutu, I think it is, okay? And he took a hard-line anti-communist stance. Why? Because the CIA, on record, propped him up. So here we have in like 65, right, this guy who's propped up by the CIA. And 65 isn't that long ago, okay? It's less than like 16 years before I was born, okay? That's nothing, you know? So the CIA is manipulating that place. And that would also eventually lead to the Second Congolese War, which is the biggest war in African history, where 4 million people were killed, countless people were raped and murdered, and they never got on their feet after that war. Okay, so we're going to go like almost country by country here. We're going to talk about Ethiopia, you know, we talked about Algeria. Okay, their interference and their ulterior motives and them, you know, putting what's known as the comprador elite. Write that term down. The comprador elite are basically, on record, these spoiled people, you know, in Africa, for example, who are token minorities, who kiss the ass of Western powers and whoever else comes around and maintain the global construct. And they reinforce the despicable falsehoods that come with the eugenic narratives of white supremacy and so on and so forth. You know, narratives come from eugenicists. Okay, like Francis Galton, who coined the term, who was a high-ranking Freemason, and then there's a scientist. Everyone kissed his ass. No, trust science, and there's white supremacy scientists and so on, white supremacist scientists, what have you. So they're fuming me, making it harder for me to talk, and that's right up their alleyway. There's some kind of weirdos who think that they should interfere with people. When you think about why they don't just kill me, it has to do with the difference between being a frat person and being somebody who just kills somebody right away. Frat people are bitches. They were bitches in boarding school. They're bitches in college. They are bitches. Okay? They're the type of people that do stupid pranks on people and say, hey, dweebtard, you don't look so good now. Okay, that's who these people are. That's who George Bush is, John Kerry. They're people in these fraternities and secret societies. Okay, and real briefly here, it reminds me of this World War II movie I saw. It was about the CIA, I believe it was. And he said, they sent us another bonesman from Yale, referring to the Skull and Bones secret society at Yale. It was so commonly understood that frats and secret societies are in intelligence agencies. Like the Bush family's history of the CIA. It was so commonly understood that it was in that old World War II movie. Pretty straightforward. Okay, there's like no other way it could be. You'd have to be insane to see it differently. Okay. So, you've got to realize that a lot of the reason why they fume me is to try to change your conception of who I am, right? So they move with a certain, think about how the American spirit relates to the English spirit or the French spirit, but really the English spirit, because America's part of the Anglosphere. To this day, America's a part of the English sphere of influence. The Freemasons, the most powerful secret society here in America, as far as anyone knows, was founded as such, right, in England. That's not a coincidence. Look at the word celebrity, right? Celebrity. Look, James Bond. Where's James Bond from? Is he from America? No. He's supposedly from England, right? In the story, he's from England, right? And you have Robin Hood. Okay, you have King Arthur and Lancelot. Why are these stories about English people? And as I bring up in my videos, for those of you who understand that occult magic spells, this witchcraft, this magic trick stuff, are real. They do the wordplay, right? Laughter is slaughter scrambled. Okay, limit is the L word for English people with the T at the end, right? The lime and the next part is E, right? With the T at the end. The limit to them is English people, English culture, English genes. So Donald Trump, to some degree, is doing it on behalf of English people. He's also doing it on behalf of Jewish people, and it's a story for another day, right? There's a bunch of political Zionists, okay, who basically attach a fake version of religion to their Israeli propaganda and to the idea of Jewish genetic, supremacy. It's very silly, very immature, very racist. Only people raised very poorly would commit to that, but that's what they're doing. And I'm not saying all whites or all Jews are doing it, but that's the situation here. Okay. And I'm not saying that they're not all doing it either, because it goes back to, in a sense, what is complicity? What's the nature of complicity? I'll let you figure that out on your own here. Okay. So they made it harder for me to write this paper. They're making it harder for me to make this, but you're going to see that I'm right here nonetheless, unless you're an idiot. Have any questions? Put in the comments. So obviously Freemasonic and CIA agreements were made, right? Because I've established that earlier in this video, that these secret societies and these fraternities are part of these intelligence agencies. Now, why do they let people who are Freemasons and people who are from Skull and Bones, why did they let them in the FBI and CIA? Because their vision for the world is basically identical to the corrupt vision of the state. When you look at it in terms of the NATO alliance or the vision of the UN, right? That part of the vision of the state, you might call it a globalist vision, but that is that's what they want you to think, right? That's part of it, yes. But nationalists are also globalists, okay? Just like there's a left-right paradigm, bipartisan agreements, right? Call it hedging one's bet, call it arranging it all in the first place. Either way, it has the same effect. Whether they're plotting it out to a T, whether they're hedging their bets and it's playing out a certain way, they're still to blame here. That's the bottom line. They're the main reason why Africans and other people from developed nations aren't doing so well financially, what have you, but they're doing a lot better than their oppressors, spiritually speaking, in terms of life success, because moral success is greater than financial success and mere social status and social acceptance. I mean, look at the Bible, right? You know, Christ was, as a character in the story, wasn't rich in the Bible, and lots of people hated him. They said, give us Barabbas, and that's what got him, you know, crucified, and so on and so forth. And so it is in real life. It's like a, you know, it's like a riddle or a comparison to real life. Okay, the same types of people who crucified Christ screened out people. Speaking of that, right, you got Patrice Lumumba killed in 1961, Malcolm X killed in 1965, and Martin Luther King killed in 1968, right? So here are these people in this neo-Roman culture. Just the other day, or just yesterday, I saw Stephen Miller at Charlie Koch's memorial in a YouTube clip, and he was saying how they trace their roots to Athens and Rome. These are neo-Romans, and it's not just conservatives, right? There's a lot of liberals or Democrats who come from Greek societies, Greek frats and Greek sororities in college. Okay, so they're making it harder for me to speak. Let me just shoot through this here real quickly here. I got a lot to go through here. Okay, other key events include Patrice Lumumba being killed by the CIA and their allies, and Nasser supposedly thwarting Israel, France, and Britain's attempt to exert more power in Egypt. Basically, he sunk these boats in the Suez Canal, and that forced a certain situation where other countries were mad at France and Britain and Israel, according to mainstream history. And the U.S. said, hey, why did you do things in a way that led to this massive disruption in this major canal, the Suez Canal over there in Egypt, right? Suez is is Zeus scrambled, by the way. Going back to the Greek societies, right? They kind of are behind the government. But why did you cause this problem to happen? And it was also symbolic, you know, of the canal referring to the ear canal, right? Zeus and canal for ear canal, right? Who listens to who? And if you think that's just a coincidence, we'll explain why Zeus's Roman counterpart is Jupiter, which is a play on words for Jew, pit, ear. And his consort is Juno. You get Juju, Jupiter and Juno, which refers to West African witchcraft, okay, which was very much a part of the later dynasties in Egypt, which influenced the Romans and the Greeks who colonized Egypt in the foreign period for a significant amount of time. You had idiots there like Ptolemy Soter and the Ptolemy dynasties and Cleopatra, just narcissistic trash, but one way or another, they were very much influenced by the Egyptian culture, so much that part of the reason why Julius Caesar was killed is because he started to bring Egyptian deities into Rome. Okay, so you have that Mark Antony, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, a whole mess there. I'm not going to get into that. I'm going way over time here. Let's just wrap this up here. Okay, so I'm going to actually have to make a part 3. I didn't want to make a damn part 3. I'm going to have to make a part 3. I'm going over time, and they mess with my phone and make it hard to upload things, and I can't make the video for too long here. Again, you see just an example of sabotage. This video would have came out a lot better, right? If I had people working with me, if I wasn't being fumed in poison, I could have a nice, attractive female speaking on things. You know, I would have been able to edit the video and with the latest technology and the best apps and programs. But I wasn't able to because they hack my phone through these things. They go way out of their way to sabotage me. And again, I got 23 record. I have 23 witnesses on record. So let's wrap this up here. Okay, so we see in these conflicts yet another example of how excessive and useless details and expectations and social norms are key in oppression. For example, what do people learn in school and what don't they? So we see often when people discuss this, right, or if you were to learn this stuff in school, it would go on in a way that's boring, that causes you to miss the point. But when you compile this stuff and you put it together in a certain way, when you bring up the social clubs and the corporations, when you tell it in a way that the government doesn't want colleges to tell it, okay, you see that the picture is more clear. However, colleges do teach it in a way that make it clear that the white man has been sabotaging the black man, especially African nations, and exploiting them for a long time. and that only an idiot like Donald Trump would argue that the reason why these guys aren't successful, in terms of governance, is because of their genes. But if we look back at the history of governance, all right, black people governed more effectively. Right, when the smoke cleared, white people ended up with the worst real estate. There's two real estates that's very bad, in terms of the two types of land you don't want to live on. One is the desert. Man, who wants to live in the desert, right? How many of you want to live in the desert? Two is in the snow. Okay, humans do not naturally come from a place with snow. So how many of you want to freeze your balls off or be cooked in the desert sun? You want to be in a place where there's a lot of vegetation, like West Africa. A lot of fertile farmland, like West Africa. You do not want to be in a place where it snows. My goodness, people weren't exactly snowboarding saying this is great. And don't forget the Ice Age. They got their asses kicked by the Ice Age. And they couldn't come back into Africa effectively because they weren't smart enough. Because they weren't good enough at martial arts. Because martial arts comes from black people, not from Europeans or Asians. No offense to anybody, but that's the bottom line here. That's very important to understand that. We see these racist people time and time again spending billions of dollars every year running psyops on black people, paying people like Gaddis and Fuentes and Carlson and to say racist things again and again, okay, and things that are, but in the case of Tucker Carlson, you might say they're more borderline racist, but I think a lot of people consider them racist, okay? They're doing that trying to impress upon people, hey, if you want to be successful in life, you better not date them, because they're jealous. Because Set is a deity of jealousy. It's right there in the word whites. No offense to anybody, I'm part white, not racist. But do you think it's a coincidence that the word whites is a play on words for why Set? Why are they doing these things? Because they're more like the deity Set than Horus, who is in his true form, is also Jesus' true form, the Son of God, me. Okay. Now again, I'm not making this video to bash white people or something. I'm making this video because I'm fighting for God and fighting for honor for the righteous. And God's order happens to be a Royal African Falcon martial art order. Okay? So when white people misrepresent God and try to make it seem like black people are inferior, they're interfering with God's work on the highest level, and I'm going to set it straight and I'm going to chastise them for it. If you're approaching the exception of the rule, or you think you're the exception of the rule, if you actually were the exception of the rule, like my mother, which is the only white person I consider a true exception to the rule, because everyone else is cheating me out of my right to lead, and she gave me birth, so I consider her blameless. But if you actually were approaching it, or you're the exception, whatever you are is whatever you are. Okay? If you're the most guilty, then yes, this is very much aimed at you. Pretty straightforward. Everyone consider that fair? Is that cool? As Charlie Kirk would say, okay. But let's end this talking about the Nigerian Civil War. The Nigerian Civil War is something I researched quite a bit when I was younger. Read a thick book about it, talked to people about it, what have you. The Nigerian Civil War ends in 1970. This is when my dad comes here, in fact. That's how much I know that Trump is wrong. Is my dad came here in 1967, actually, when the war first started. And in 1970, the Nigerian Civil War ends. After 2 million people are killed and thousands of soldiers are killed. Okay, there's genocide going on, what have you. And who armed the Nigerian government, even though it was a Muslim government, right? It was a Muslim government with a weak Christian figurehead as a president initially. But he's quickly replaced by a Muslim president. Okay, and America and all these other countries, right, Britain, they back the government. And there's some cartoons that suggest France and the Soviet Union and so on and so forth. Okay, so these kind of guys who sit at the table and split the pie and try to make white people seem superior, they armed the Nigerian government and they committed genocide, and that's how my father came here. And they wanted to try to put themselves above the Royal African Falcon martial art order, so they allowed my father to work his way up from being painless to being a brain surgeon. So they could then say, hey, put yourself beneath us and make us seem superior, which is something they do with a lot of people who they try to make token minorities. But because my father is who he is, his genes express themselves through me. And so did God's Spirit first and foremost. And so it's clear that I'm the most righteous person ever lived. When you consider my top martial arts challenge, you consider how I'm the only one telling the complete truth about these things publicly and scrambling to do so. Okay, there's so many things that point right to me. Right, you look at the wordplay, Kuro Obi black belt, right? Obi is an Igbo word before it's an Asian word. It means King Hard Hut Edison Center Temple Core. Okay, and Obi spelled backwards is Igbo, right? The name of my tribe, my father's tribe. And, in a sense, my tribe, I'm part black, part white. And so we're going to get into Ethiopia and Mengistu and Haile Selassie in the next video. I went way over time. I was hoping to do this whole thing in like 10-15 minutes. I went way over time.